Steve Young was on KTIK up in Boise, Idaho late last week. And I don't understand necessarily what the premise was of him appearing on KTIK because it's sports radio in Boise, Idaho. But hey, he joined them on 95.3 FM on Friday and made a quote regarding a Philadelphia Eagles offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore, and BYU. Now, let me give you a little bit of the backstory on Kellen Moore. Most of you will remember him from his heyday playing for the Boise State Broncos. I lovingly use the term he was the horse-faced killer when he was at Boise. He won at an astronomical rate with the Boise State Broncos and just an incredible football player, savvy, smart, and he felt like he had all the makings of being a future coach, and it helped that he was actually, I think, the son of a high school coach. Well, I remember, this goes back probably 5 or 6 years, that there were people telling me, hey, Jake, could Kellen Moore ever coach at BYU? And I said, nah, I don't know. It wouldn't be necessarily out of the question because really the only job in the BYU football program that you have to be an active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to be a coach at BYU for is the head coaching position. Well, and then somebody told me, this goes back maybe 3 or 4 years, that, hey, Kellen Moore might be a member of the church. And I said, cool, if he is. Now, I did know that his wife, who the woman he married, was a member of the LDS church. I just never knew that Kellen had actually joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints until earlier this year. The Church News, which is like a subsidiary of the Deseret News or something to that effect, wrote a story about professional football players in the NFL. And they mentioned in there that Kellen Moore was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Well, Steve Young, the BYU legend himself, was on KTIK up in Boise and said this, quote, I'll whisper it to you guys. I want Kellen. He needs to be a future coach at BYU, unquote. Very interesting that Steve Young, like I said, a legend himself, a guy who knows football inside and out, has probably forgotten more football than I literally ever hope to know, thinks that Kellen Moore needs to be a part of the BYU football program in some circumstance. Here's the situation, though. Kellen Moore is currently an offensive coordinator in the NFL. He's fairly highly thought of. He's worked with the Los Angeles Chargers, the Dallas Cowboys, and most recently now with the Philadelphia Eagles. He may have made a couple other stops in there, but those are the 3 I can remember him being the offensive coordinator for. He is very highly thought of for his offensive analytical mind as an offensive play caller. Guys like him are going to get opportunities to be a head coach at the NFL level in the not too distant future. So, all of you out there who are sitting here listening to me talk about this are probably saying, well, what would they have to do? You'd have to essentially do what BYU did with Kevin Young. Kevin Young was the highest paid assistant coach in the NBA. He was paid north of $2 million in his role with the Phoenix Suns in the NBA. BYU went down to Phoenix, sold them on the vision they had for the football program in the circumstance, and the basketball program, paid him a very healthy sum, reportedly somewhere around $4 million to come and coach BYU men's basketball. And we've all seen what Kevin Young has done with the BYU basketball program. Could Kellen Moore have that same impact on the BYU football program? You'll never know until you try. But are you willing to dump Kalani Sitake or encourage him to move along to make room for Kellen Moore? Second thing, does Kellen Moore want to coach at the collegiate level? It's a great question because the collegiate level now is more and more going towards an NFL model. But the one thing you have in the NFL that the college level does not have is a salary cap. You have the same, you're on the same level playing field with every other team out there in the NFL. The same amount of money to spend each year. If you build your roster the right way, you have roster continuity and you can win at a very high level. Former BYU Cougar himself, Andy Reid, is at the top of the heap right now in that regard. Kellen Moore would have to, have interest in coming down to the collegiate level, a place that I don't believe he's ever coached to that high of a level, or at least I think he may have been like a graduate assistant at one point, maybe in his coaching career, but he's never really worked at the collegiate level. So he would have to be like Kevin Young, who has worked at the professional level most of his career, want to make a change and jump down to the collegiate level. And oh, by the way, you probably get to pay him a very hefty sum of money to come to BYU. Let's just say, in theory, Kevin Young was making $2 million with the Phoenix Suns. BYU reportedly paid double that to get him to come to BYU. There was a report the other day from Pete Thamel, who has got his ear to the ground more than almost any other college football insider out there, that said that in terms of Kalani Sitake being on a theoretical hot seat, that he was owed a $12 million buyout to essentially, if BYU were to move on from Kalani Sitake. Well, considering Kalani Sitake's contract, as we all know, runs through 2027, you can do the math on that. That essentially would say, okay, there's 3 years remaining on this deal, 25, 26, 27. Buyout's $12 million. You divide that by 3, and Kalani's making $4 million on an annual basis. So would you have to pay Kellen Moore $8 million to come to BYU? In theory, I think you would. I'm just spitballing here. Is it out of the realm of possibility that BYU be willing to pay their head football coach $8 million? No, I don't think so. If they had the right guy, let's say Kalani Sitake ends up winning at an astronomically high level in the Big 12, and he starts to obviously to garner interest from other programs out there, I would imagine that BYU's boosters would step up and foot the bill to make sure that he stays put in Provo, because more than anything, BYU fans want their programs to win at an extremely high level. If for whatever reason it doesn't work out with Kalani Sitake, is Kellen Moore now at the top of BYU's wish list, looking at what the success of Kevin Young has been with BYU basketball just 5-6 months into his run with the BYU men's basketball program? It kind of feels that way. It really does. It really feels like he might have jumped himself to the top of the list. The list for head coaching candidates for the BYU football program is not incredibly long. We all know this. They have to be an active member of the LDS faith. Well, I think I have Jay Hill on that list. Obviously, as an associate head coach at BYU. Kellen Moore's on that list right now. There's just a handful of people out there. The interesting part is to hear a guy like Steve Young say, I'll whisper it to you guys, I want Kellen in a role at BYU. But here's the deal. If you want Kellen Moore at BYU, you're going to have to move on from your head coach currently, because I just don't see Kellen Moore coming to BYU as an offensive coordinator at this juncture. Because if he has success with Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles, and I've got no reason to think that he won't, he's got guys like A.J. Brown, Britton Covey around him. He's got Saquon Barkley at running back now. He's got a stable of weapons, and if he has success running this offense in Philadelphia, his next stop is to be a head coach at the NFL level. There are some people out there who believe that Andy Reid would have been willing to come to BYU as the head coach in 2001. This is kind of right at the very beginning stages of what has become one of the more legendary careers in the NFL. Well, could BYU see a similar circumstance play out with Kellen Moore? I know that Andy's a BYU alum and Kellen is not, but could Kellen find himself as a head coach at the NFL level before too long, and BYU, in theory, misses out on the opportunity to have him as their head coach? It's also a possibility. Just a very, very curious thing to hear a guy like Steve Young go to bat for a Boise State Bronco, not a BYU guy, but a Boise State guy. Once again, the quote, I'll whisper it to you guys. I want Kellen. He needs to be a future coach at BYU. It doesn't say he needs to be the future coach, a future coach at BYU. Interesting times, but something to monitor and obviously to keep in your back pocket for future reference if and when something goes down, if BYU needs to look around at other options.